Hello everyone, it's Martin aka Anders, and today we're going to be jumping into the next section of Computing Competitive covering the VALORANT Champions Tour. This time we're headed across the pond to cover Stage 1 Challengers 1 over in Europe. Let's jump right into it. Diving right into the thick of things, we'll take a look at these map stats. Before we go any further, I want to quickly touch on the fact that we're handling a relatively small sample size here. Only 63 maps in total were played in Stage 1 Challengers 1 over in Europe, so even more dramatically the case than North America, the statistics here are going to be fairly susceptible to high variance, and because of that, when it comes to win rates and sidedness, we have to take them with a very, very large grain of salt. That said, the pick rates were something quite interesting over in Europe, specifically the high contrast in the pick rate of Ascent between them and North America. We see that Bind took the top slot with just under 24% pick rate, Haven and Split came in the second slot with a 22.25% tie, Ascent trailing in fourth at 17.5%, and finally Icebox coming in at roughly 14 1/3. If we compare that to North America, the relative rankings of Bind, Haven, Split, and Icebox, proceeding in that order, is completely mirrored. The standout, however, is that while in Europe, Ascent falls here at the fourth slot, in North America it was the second. Intuitively, this difference in Ascent pick rate dynamic between the two regions isn't something that I would naturally land on. A lot of people credit with Europe as being a significantly more methodical and default-focused region, and in a lot of ways, Ascent is the map that is closest to a traditional CSGO fundamentally driven TAC FPS map that we have in the pool, so the fact that we're seeing here that North America has a significantly more pronounced preference for it is a little bit out of the blue, definitely something worth mentioning. That will wrap us up for maps though, so let's swing over to the agents. As we move over to the agent statistics, I want to reiterate once more that the win rate portion of this is going to be pretty significantly unreliable. I'm going to focus the majority of my energy and conversation on the pick rates. Kicking off the top, we have a pretty marked surprise. In North America, we had Omen taking this top slot, approaching 95% pick rate, and in this case, we see that that is very much so not the case. Instead, we have Sova coming in at the top, and not even in the same realm of pick rate as Omen was in NA, he comes in at a mere 69.5%. There are a couple compounding layers of intrigue here. This isn't just a case of Europe's top slot taking a smaller overall percentage than NA's top slot, this is also Sova being at an overall lower pick rate, and in fact, Europe's top pick not garnering the same percentage as even any of the top three in NA. This very powerfully communicates just how much less concentrated the European agent pick meta is. You don't have an agent with over 90% pick rate or even above 70% pick rate for that matter. The wealth is spread, so to speak. Descending from Sova, we have Raze coming in at the second slot at 65.5%. Again, a pick rate very pronouncedly different from their counterparts across the Atlantic. We see Raze here jumping 4 slots from 5th to 2nd when comparing the two metas. Below her we have Jet, only 1 slot below her space in NA at 61.5%. In 4th, we see Omen dropping rather significantly to 58.4%. This is almost in direct proportion to the prevalence of other controllers in this metagame, we'll touch on them in a moment. Below him we have Killjoy at just under 43.25%, an interesting case where for the first time ever, we have Killjoy eking out a market share greater than that of Cypher. Tied with Killjoy we have the wonderkind of Europe himself, Breach, also at 43.2%. Following them both we have Cypher at 42.4%. Seeing a fairly significant surge in pick rate following Heretic's success in First Strike, we have Sage at 39.2%. And now we land on those controllers with Brimstone very clearly owning himself a non-negligible amount of market share post-buff with 28% flat. And even Viper we see taking dramatic strides in her play rate with 18.4%. Below her we see Skye with 16.8%, Reyna with only 12%, and then a literal drop off to nearly zero with Phoenix at 0.8% tied with Yoru. the what is now approaching comical contrast between NA and EU's relative feelings on Phoenix continues to show quite starkly. That will get us through agents, however, so we'll hop over to compositions. A point here that stands above all else is that the most played composition didn't even break 10%. As a matter of fact, if we compare it to the most played composition in North America and par their relative shares of their metagames, this is less than half as prevalent as the most played composition in North America. The trend of Europe's broader agent and composition pools continues. That said, however, we don't see astronomical amounts of variety amongst this top 5. The top slot being taken by Breach, Jet, Killjoy, Omen, Sova, which is vaguely analogous to the top most played comp in North America, simply switching out Breach for Phoenix, and switching out the Killjoy for a Cypher would get you to the same place. Moving down to the second slot, we see that Europe's affinity for Breach continues, with Breach, Raze, Cypher, Omen, Sova, again something that is a very close analog to North American standard, this time adding the complication that EU has shown an increasing preference for Raze, even if it means compromising a Jet. We see the slot below it is again the exact same concept, switching out the Sentinel for Killjoy instead of Cypher. Moving to the fourth slot, we hear the whispers of first strikes past, with Breach, Raze, Cypher, Omen, Sage, something that you would be disingenuous not to credit at least in fairly large part to Heretic's success with the Sage pick during that past event. Coming in the last slot, we have something that is quite a significant mix-up actually, with Sky, Raze, Killjoy, Brimstone, Jet. This is a permutation of the Raze Jet double dive compositions that we see to varying degrees all around the world at this point, bringing in Sky over Breach, which is a fairly unique adaptation, bringing in the Killjoy, and switching out the Omen for a Brimstone make this quite an unusual mix-up, and so to see it here amongst the top played comps at this event was quite the surprise. Before we elaborate on it too much though, we may as well move to the next segment. My composition of the event is none other than this Brimstone, Jet, Killjoy, Raze, Sky roster that Wave rode through much of the competition, including their best of 3 with Fnatic, to find the upset win and move on to the closed qualifier. This composition, while following much of the same model as the double dive compositions we've seen in, for instance, Brazil and Southeast Asia, it is very much so its own. It brings an incredibly potent default to the table with soft information tools in Raze's Boombot, Sky's Guiding Lights, and Trailblazer, as well as high flexibility smokes with both Brimstone and Jet. This is augmented by Killjoy's passive information gathering and the power ulti she brings to the table, which only serves to amplify this composition's already high caliber site-taking potential. This composition is incredibly intriguing, and I could very easily dedicate an entire series to analyzing it, but the reason I selected it wasn't purely for its intrigue, and rather what it represents in Europe's approach to this game. This composition had functionally no precedent globally, and certainly in Europe had essentially zero presence in any official to date. In spite of that, Wave was willing to experiment and break the mold. In return, they had an incredibly dynamic comp that was removed enough from the overarching metagame that it caught many of their opponents off guard, and served them up a win that effectively no one thought they could take. This kind of risk-taking and experimentation is what I wished was the norm on an international basis. The reason I chose this as my comp of the event is this. If we compare Challengers 1 in North America versus Europe, North America had 110 maps, whereas Europe had just 63. In North America, across those 110 maps, they played 45 different compositions. In a map count of nearly half that much, Europe played 47. The reason this was my composition of the tournament was because it and Wave's approach to this event embody what is in my eyes one of the defining characteristics of Europe, its innovation. And for a lot of you, this is going to feel like I'm beating a dead horse. I've been a champion of compositional innovation as long as this game's been around, and I've lambasted regions in the past for their lack of it. I'm looking at you, North America. But, that point aside, the reason I continue with it is because it still hasn't changed. If we look at North America, they're taking baby steps, but when you compare them to everyone else in the world, they're miles behind. And the reason it bothers me so much is because there's this constant hypothetical argument that people have of who's the best region in the world. Well, let me give you a hypothetical of my own. If you had to bet on two teams, which would you choose? In one case, you have a team that's very focused on a singular style. They're very good at that style, but that's the context that they have. And then you have another team that is very practiced against that style, albeit at a lower level, and then countless other styles around it. Any logical betting man takes the latter, not the prior, and that is the scary thing that North America has to stare down as we approach our first international lands. That is why I highlight this. That is why I talk about this so frequently. I would love to hear your comments down below what your guys' thoughts are on compositional innovation. I've been at it a couple times with other people in the past about this. There isn't an objective saying that having more compositions is naturally better. That's something that's very much so up to debate, and I would love to hear your thoughts. Per the usual, if you're enjoying this content, don't forget to like and subscribe. And as always, thank you so much for watching, and I will see you in the next one.